Hello everyone, my name is Alexander, and today we will talk about Cro, about LDAP, and of course about Perl 6. So firstly, for folks who don't really know what Cro is, I will give a brief introduction, hopefully good enough, and then we will move to LDAP section for folks who don't know what LDAP is, and then we will inspect some internals and external API of Cro LDAP model we created. So, firstly about Cro core, it is basically the main part. Of course, it is a core, and it is a library for building distributed reactive systems that uses Perl 6 concurrency primitives to express data flow in a natural way. And it does a teeny bit more. Okay, and it is very interesting, but now for people who don't really follow that, it is okay, it is normal, it is fine, and now we will do it once more and with some feeling. So we programmers work with real world, with real problems, and it happens in real time. And real time, it supplies us with some events. For example, some packets may arrive from our sockets, or there may be some file changes, logs can be written, and a user can do input, and for example, our devices can send us events and so on and so on. There are a lot of events, and what we really want to do with them is to actually process, most likely. For example, we can take some logs in real time and filter them, for example, by category or by, I don't know, level of danger of this log message, and then we can mark them or tag them with something, and then we may compress them in some separate files, and then those files are sent to backup server. So what we actually did here is that we have some source of our events. It is reactive, it is asynchronous, we don't know why something may came, and then we do some transformation. We can filter and then mark and then compress, and then we think of our data, we just send it, or we can store it or on our disk or something like that. And here Cro shines because it helps you in building such pipelines of execution, of processing, and it provides you some primitives, some roles like Cro source, Cro transform, and Cro sync. There are more of them that help you to easily build such pipelines and combine them because they are made in a composable way. And so Cro core is a library that is used to build services or microservices, because I don't know about yours Cro, but micro stands for microservices. And the services, they can communicate with each other using different means, for example, HTTP or 0MQ or LDAP, for example, whatever you need. And it is packed with some primitives. Some of them are just simple, like Cro transform, and some of them are more sophisticated. And Cro as a whole, as a project, it is a set of such libraries, and it is built upon this idea. And it allows you, the programmer, to think about what to do with your data, not how to deliver it, how to route it, and so on. And now we are back to LDAP. So LDAP, it is a binary client-server protocol, a bit similar to, for example, HTTP, but not quite. There are some differences, and it is used to communicate with a thing called directory service providers. Very oversimplifying, a directory is something that keeps your data in a hierarchical database. For example, you and your company may even use it, for example, to store data about your employees or about your resources. It looks like a tree, for example, and tree nodes are represented by entries of this database. Each entry has a distinguished name. It is like ID, so you can identify it. And also, each entry stores some attributes about this entry. For example, for a person, it can be a name or a phone or an address or a photo, something like that. And using LDAP client, you can actually work with this data. You can add, modify your entries, and so on. There are a lot of different operations. Okay. And client and server, they, of course, send each other LDAP messages. Like clients send some requests, and our server responds with some responses, of course. And our messages, they have some common pieces like ID or controls. And each message, it carries either a request or a response. And unlike HTTP, where you can, it is actually was designed with a lot of different types of a query, but LDAP, and in reality, we are more likely to use a GET and POST in HTTP. But in LDAP, there are a lot of different operations, and request-response types, they represent those operations. So, for example, for bind operation, you have bind request and bind response. And all those types, they are described in a specification. It is written using ASN1 specification language. It is a formal language to describe types, and those abstract formal types, they then can be encoded and decoded into actual bytes using async basic encoding rules of ASN1. There are a lot of rules, but LDAP uses basic encoding rules or just bare. So now Cro-LDAP types. It is actually a foundation of our Cro-LDAP model, because we can't do anything without types to work with. So how we can handle it in Perl 6? Firstly, we have about 3 import statements. We import Cro to get this Cro message role, and then we have ASN types to have some, of course, ASN types. And this third import statement is parameterized with a parameter. Actually, docs/ldap.asn, it is a file name, and during compilation, this file name is passed to ASN meta model, and it reads this file, it parses it, and compiles types for you and exports them. And it happens at compile time. And then we define a Cro-LDAP message class for just to override a single method to have a bit more nice output in logs. And then, because imports in Perl 6 are lexical, it means that they are not transitive. I'm not sure if it is more clear, but still. So we just re-export our things imported in this model to all other models. So it is basically everything. We are done with types. Those 14 lines of code, they were quite hard to write, and now we are on the client. So what our client does, it essentially takes user input, and then it creates a message, of course. It is a source of our messages, and they are encoded. It is transformed from messages into bytes, and then they are sent then we send them to a socket, for example, and we can do a lot of other things, because Perl 6 is very concurrent, and Cro is very concurrent, and almost everything in LDAP is concurrent too, so we can abuse it. And when something arrives from the socket back, we add those bytes. It is a source of our events again. We parse them, and it is returned to user. and we can hopefully save the world with it, I hope. And now a server, I thought that writing a directory is not very interesting, but we can, given we already have a parser and a serializer for LDAP types, we can just as well just shuffle them a bit from the client parts, and it looks a bit the same, but in the reverse order. So we take bytes, we parse them, and then we can pass them to a real directory provider, those messages. And once we have some response, we encode it back into bytes and send them. So now back to the API. Okay, we are fine. And firstly, of course, we need to connect. So Cro-LDAP client connect method with some LDAP as URL. And then once this promise is skipped, it means we are connected and we have working Cro-LDAP client. So first operation, it is not necessary to be first, but we likely do want it for the server to know who we are. Do we have rights to modify, to add things? So we bind to our server with some name, with some password, of course, and it is a synchronous operation. Actually, it doesn't return a promise, so it is blocking. It is one of a very small subset of LDAP operations that are blocking. Almost every other operations are concurrent. And we can check result code, and when it is when the binding was not successful, we should somehow process error. And next thing, interesting, it is a search. A search is pretty, how should I put it? It is pretty smart in LDAP. Here we just specify a very simple thing, a destination name, DN of entry, which will be a root of our search. So we, for example, in a tree, we search all children of some root, and a filter attribute length equals Perl 6, because we are interested in it. But it can be smarter. There are more parameters. You can specify timeouts, or how much entries do you want, and things like that. And search returns us a supply. Whenever something arrives, whenever we have some entry or reference returned from our server, we can process it. For example, for Cro-LDAP entry, it represents a single node in this directory. We can expect its attributes, for example. And when it is a reference, the server told us that, well, I don't know how to process this search, but I know another server who can do that, and we can query it later, of course. And the second part, it should be more straightforward. Firstly, all operations here, they will be returning a promise. So you can do things concurrently, simultaneously. First thing is just simple addition. You add a new entry with a destination name to be dn equals new, and just a single, just one attribute given name is tester. And of course, when the response arrives, you check it. Was it successful or not? And we can, for example, rename it, because we don't like this dn equals new, so we rename it to dn equals newer, and of course we check response. For example, we want to modify our entry and change, just replace value of attribute given name to be robot now, and of course we specify dn equals newer because we just rename it, and of course then we check our response. And then we can, for example, compare value of our attributes. For example, for dn equals newer, we want to check attribute given name, is it tester or not? And I hope that the result code is compare false, because, well, we just changed that. And then when you are content, when you don't like your dn equals newest anymore, you can just delete it. And hopefully there will be no error message. And the third thing that is a bit interesting in LDAP, if you are working with LDAP, you are most likely to know, or you soon will know, about a thing called LDIF or LDIF if you want. It is a textual representation of LDAP entries data, because entries can contain things like sequence of bytes, for example, images, then and you want to store it as a text, for example, then you can just encode it using LDIF and, for example, do a backup of your directory and then populate it to some other server. It can show you, it can represent two kinds of things. First kind, you already see it, it just represents some entry. DN is specified and then whose attributes. A single LD file, it can contain many entries described. And the second kind is that LDIF can contain not only entries, just entries, but a description of modification to entries. So, for example, you are saying that for DN, DC equals test, you want to edit, and for DS equals test1, we want to delete it, and things like that. So, for example, you have a lot of those LD files, and maybe you want to add them to your directory, and maybe you are bold today and you want even modify your entries. And there is a pretty simple solution. You just need to sync your local data with your remote server. So it looks a bit like this. You use Cro-LDAP entry parse method to parse your LDIF text into number of entries, actually type of array entries. It is a positional of Cro-LDAP entry objects. And then you just say to your client, sync those entries with the server. Of course, it should be connected. And then you receive a bunch of promises for each request you had promised. And when it is skipped, well, please check your responses. It is important. So, okay. So, we still have things that we need to finish or to improve. For example, LDAP client, it can be smarter. We have some bugs, but the most important thing we want to do is to be helpful to Perl 6 users. It is very important. So, a lot of common things, they just work against Open LDAP implementation. It is a mature old implementation of LDAP directory server. And some common things, they are still work in progress, but well, we are trying, and we welcome any bug reports, suggestions, ideas, any feedback, and Perl 6 delivers both your data and whatever you want. So, thank you very much. I'm not sure how much time we have. Okay, I think we still have about 3 minutes, or if there are any questions, yep, sure.
Have you tried pointing it at an active directory server?
Okay, so the question was if I tried to point it at Active Directory server. The answer is I didn't, because I don't have an Active Directory server configured. But I actually I have integration testing against Open LDAP implementation, and if Active Directory does it correct, it should be fine. It should be okay, I hope. Any other questions? No, no. Just too shy, or I was a bit unclear. I'm not sure. Maybe I was too clear. Okay. Of course, what I can add about this ASN1 stuff and how do we magically, semi-magically do things at compile type. We have compilation at compile time because it is cool. And tomorrow I will be giving another talk dedicated to this topic. So if you want to know more, please come. Even if you don't have an idea what ASN1 is, we will try to clear it up at least a bit. Any other questions? Yep. I don't. Okay, everything? Okay. Okay.